Sakredwaom. What if a single fingerprint forgotten in a house's basement could unravel the mystery that has haunted a family for nearly 3 decades? Found in the basement, this evidence could finally uncover the truth. But what it reveals might be even more shocking. The killer could have been closer than anyone ever imagined. Inside the house, the air felt stagnant, as if time had stopped in that dark basement. The dim light streaming through the small, dirty window barely illuminated the cold walls. It was there that JonBenét Ramsey's body was found, in that gloomy basement that had kept secrets for decades. No one could have imagined that, after so much time, a new piece would emerge, a key fingerprint that could change everything. John Ramsey, JonBenét's father, always remembered that day as if it were yesterday. The phone rang early that Christmas morning, and the sounds of laughter and torn wrapping paper had vanished. What remained was a house full of questions and, at the same time, an overwhelming silence. JonBenét wasn't in bed, and the note found on the stairs said she had been taken, but the worst was yet to come. Hours later, he himself found his daughter in the basement, wrapped in a blanket, as if someone had tried to hide the monstrosity of what had been done. The police arrived quickly, but the answers never came. John still remembered the muffled voices of the investigators, pacing back and forth through the house, searching every corner but finding nothing to point to a culprit. Questions began to be directed at the family itself, and the focus of the investigation seemed to turn towards them. This never left him at peace. Now, almost 30 years later, new evidence emerges. A fingerprint in the basement, never before analyzed with the rigor it deserved, is finally being investigated with modern technologies. Could this forgotten proof bring the truth to light? John wonders if justice for his daughter is finally near, or if this fingerprint will just be another piece leading nowhere. While waiting for the authorities to return with the results, John looked out the kitchen window, where so many happy mornings had taken place. The smell of coffee wafted in the air, but it seemed lifeless, like everything else. He wondered what else might have been overlooked that night. He remembered the small details that perhaps at the time had gone unnoticed. The bowl of pineapple on the kitchen counter, for example. Burke, JonBenét's brother, had his fingerprints found on the bowl, and the pineapple was found in his daughter's stomach during the autopsy. He always knew they were close, but what really happened that night? The theories never stopped. Some people believed that Burke could have gotten angry with JonBenét, and in a fit of rage, something terrible happened, but none of that was proven. His fingerprints on the pineapple only fueled speculation without providing conclusive answers. And now, with this new fingerprint in the basement, another doubt hung in the air. Whose mark was it? Was it Burke, who frequently played in the basement, or was it a stranger who entered the house without leaving traces? The inciting event was the news that this fingerprint was finally being analyzed, something that hadn't been done in previous years. John knew he couldn't set his expectations high, but it was hard not to let hope take over. He had been through this roller coaster before, small pieces of evidence that seemed to be the key to the case but never led anywhere. What if this time it was different? What if this was truly the proof that would connect everything? The doorbell rang, pulling him from his thoughts. Upon opening the door, he found one of the investigators who had been following the case for years. "John," the man began, his voice deep and restrained, "we have something to tell you." The investigator entered the room, and the silence felt heavier than ever. John stood up, trying to control the nervousness he felt in his hands. "Have a seat, John," the man said with a serious expression. The words sounded almost like an order, and for the first time in a long while, John felt that something truly important was about to be revealed. What could that fingerprint unveil? He looked around the room, trying to anchor himself to something, but there were only empty walls and an old chair. Everything seemed distant except for that moment. "We have news about the fingerprint we found in the basement," the investigator continued, opening a small envelope with the results. "It belongs to someone in your family." John froze. His breath caught for a second, and his mind immediately went to Burke. Could that fingerprint be his? Burke played in the basement, that was certain, but something inside John resisted the idea that the mark could be his son's. "Burke," he asked, almost breathless. The investigator paused, as if carefully choosing his words. "The fingerprint does not belong to Burke," he finally said. John felt an immediate relief, but it was soon replaced by more questions. "Then whose is it?" The investigator leaned forward, his eyes serious. "The fingerprint doesn't belong to anyone we've identified so far," he explained. "That's what makes the case more complicated. We have a lead, but it doesn't fit anyone known to us yet." The air in the room grew heavier. John felt his heart race. The fingerprint, which seemed to be a hope to finally solve the case, now opened a new door, a door to more uncertainties. "So what does this mean?" he asked, almost desperate. The investigator shook his head slowly, as if he didn't have all the answers. "We're dealing with something that could be a key clue or just another mystery." John looked out the window where the trees swayed gently in the wind. Outside, everything seemed to follow the normal rhythm of the day, but inside him, there was a storm. He thought about Juan, all the years that had passed, all the theories, all the frustrations. Could that fingerprint be the key to finally discovering who entered the house that night? John's mind returned to that ransom note, written with a pen from the house itself, demanding exactly $118,000, the exact amount of a work bonus he had received. How could someone know such a specific detail? That was another mystery that had hovered over him since the beginning of the case. Who wrote that letter, and why? "There's something else," the investigator continued, interrupting John's thoughts. "The fingerprint was found in a place we hadn't fully checked yet. It was deep in the wall, behind a box that blocked the view. This means that person was there long enough to have moved objects before everything happened." John's mind was flooded with images from that night. He remembered how he found JonBenét's body, and in the basement, the feeling of despair upon seeing his daughter in that situation, wrapped in a blanket. Every detail of that scene haunts him to this day, but over time, he had learned to live with it. But now, with this new information, everything seemed to resurface. Who was this person? Why were they there? What really happened that night? John looked at the investigator, the inevitable question escaping his lips. This fingerprint could be the key, couldn't it? The man shook his head slowly. "It could be, John, but we need more time to confirm everything." Frustration grew inside him. More time? How much longer would he have to wait? 30 years had passed, and still the truth remained elusive. What could he do now? John knew he couldn't lose hope, but the more they discovered, the more questions arose. And the worst part was the feeling that JonBenét's killer might be much closer than he imagined. The room was thick with tension. John remained silent, trying to process all the information. The fingerprint that could have provided a clear answer now seemed to be just another piece of the puzzle, a piece that could lead to more doubts or, hopefully, to the truth. He stared intently at the investigator, hoping for some additional detail that could calm his mind. But the silence only increased the uncertainty. The most intense moment of the conversation had arrived. "John," the investigator said, "are you prepared for what might come next?" The question hung in the air, without an immediate response. Because honestly, how can someone prepare for a truth they don't want to hear? John felt a mix of frustration and relief as he left the interrogation room. The fingerprint didn't have an immediate answer, but it could still be the missing piece to uncover what happened that night. The walk to his car felt longer than usual, as if the weight of all those doubts was accumulating. He looked down as he walked, his hands tucked in his pockets, trying to process what he had just heard. Inside the car, the silence was deafening. John sat still for a few minutes, staring at the steering wheel, not quite knowing what to do. All he wanted was a clear answer, a conclusion. But instead, there were more questions. Who was the person whose fingerprint was found in the basement? How did they enter the house? And why was this evidence hidden for so long? Looking out, he remembered all the times he had gone to the police over the years, always hoping that this time they would bring something concrete. But the cycle of frustration seemed endless. A clue emerged, the public got excited, and soon after, it was just another dead end. And now, even with a fingerprint, the doubts still hung in the air. On his way home, John turned on the radio, but not even the music seemed to break the whirlwind of thoughts. He thought about his daughter, JonBenet, so full of life, with a promising future ahead. He thought about her smile, the playtimes, and the fact that the case had consumed the last 30 years of his life. The worst part was not knowing if the answer was near, or if all of this would lead to another disappointment. Arriving home, the memories continued. He remembered how JonBenet loved playing with Burke. That bowl of pineapple always seemed like an insignificant detail, but at the same time, it was at the center of one of the biggest questions. The police found Paris's pineapple in JonBenet's stomach, and Burke, her brother, was the last to be associated with that evidence with his fingerprints on the bowl. But how did that connect to the murder? Could it be that everything was related? Burke was sleeping that night, John murmured to himself. Their mother, Patsy, always insisted on that, but the doubt lingering was undeniable. And now, with this new fingerprint in the basement, what else could be discovered? He grabbed a cup of coffee, but the bitter taste seemed to reflect the bitterness inside him. How much longer, he thought, wondering when or if there would be an end to all that anguish. John knew the public also wanted answers. All eyes were on this new evidence, hoping that this time something concrete would emerge. But what no one knew was the real weight of carrying that doubt for so long. Each new discovery brought a wave of hope, which soon turned into more frustration. And while the media made its speculations, John continued living with the same question. Who did this? It was impossible not to think about the number of theories that had circulated over the years. The ransom letter, the note with such specific details, like the $118,000 amount, the same amount of the bonus John had received that year. Who would know something like that? And more importantly, why leave that clue? And now, coupled with the new fingerprint, everything seemed even more confusing. John sat at the kitchen table, where so many family conversations had taken place. If this fingerprint belongs to someone who hasn't been identified yet, where is that person now? The question echoed in his mind. He knew that, as much as he wanted answers, the process would be long. But with each new detail, no matter how insignificant it seemed, something bigger was forming. The discovery of the fingerprint brought new hope, but also a new set of questions. John was in conflict, torn between the desire to find answers and the fear of another disappointment. The psychological pressure on him increased, as did the public's expectation. The fingerprint could be the key, but the uncertainty remained, keeping the tension high. The fingerprint in the basement, which seemed to be the answer to everything, was now just another piece of an increasingly complicated puzzle. The fingerprint didn't reveal clear answers, only more shadows. The mystery remained unshaken, and John wondered, would the truth ever come to light, or had it always been buried, along with his daughter? He thought about all the times he felt close to an answer. But as always, the truth seemed to slip through his fingers. The investigator had been clear. The analysis revealed nothing conclusive. Now they would have to keep searching, but searching for what? The killer? Another clue? Or perhaps more unanswered questions? John picked up the photo of JonBenét that was on the mantelpiece. His daughter's smile was like a distant but vivid memory. She had always been so full of life, with a sparkle in her eyes that seemed to light up any room. And now she had become part of a mystery he couldn't solve. It was as if JonBenét herself was trapped in time, waiting for justice. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was the investigator again. "John, we have something else," the voice on the other end said, cautious. John couldn't bear the suspense anymore. "What is it now?" he asked, trying to stay calm. "We need to investigate further the pineapple matter," the investigator replied. The pineapple. The memory came rushing back. Burke's fingerprints on the bowl. The fact that JonBenét had eaten pineapple before she died. But why did it still matter? Could it somehow connect Burke to his sister's death? "We're not sure yet, but what's clear is that we can't rule anything out," the investigator explained. John felt the weight of those words. He had always defended his son, always believed that Burke had nothing to do with the murder, but now the doubt was inescapable. He hung up the phone and stood there, unsure of what to do. The conflict inside him was growing. The fingerprint in the basement, Burke's fingerprints on the pineapple, the ransom note with a specific amount, everything seemed to connect in ways he didn't understand. How could all this make sense? And more importantly, how could he continue living with all these doubts? In the days that followed, the investigation continued. John began to distance himself from easy answers. The idea of an intruder, which had seemed so plausible before, now felt a bit more distant. If Burke was involved in some way, he needed to know. It wasn't just about solving JonBenét's case. It was about finally finding peace for the entire family. At that point, John realized that the truth wouldn't be easy. He might spend the rest of his life trying to find out, but never be sure of anything. But one thing he knew, JonBenét deserved more. She deserved justice, even if it cost him his peace. He returned to the basement where it all happened. The environment was the same as before, the cold walls, the dense air. But this time, John felt something different. He realized it was no longer about finding a culprit, but about facing what had happened head on. It was about accepting that perhaps the answers wouldn't come from outside, but from within himself. John began to see the case not as a quest for revenge or blame, but as a process of understanding. Understanding that some answers would never come, but that he needed to move forward for himself, for JonBenét, and for Burke. It was the only way to find some kind of peace. We may never know who took JonBenét from us, but perhaps the real answer lies in how we move forward, seeking justice but accepting uncertainty. What do you think? Will we ever find all the pieces of this puzzle? Leave your thoughts in the comments and share your theories. As we reach the end of this investigation, the question that echoes in many of our minds still remains. Who left that fingerprint in the Ramsey's basement? It could be a new clue, or perhaps just another piece of a complex puzzle. But one thing is certain, the search for justice for JonBenét remains alive, as does the mystery surrounding her death. This new evidence, along with all the unanswered questions about that night, opens the door to new theories and developments. Mystery hunters have always been by our side, searching with us for every piece of the truth that seems to be hidden in the shadows. Not every monster hides in the shadows, as we've seen here, and sometimes evil is closer than we imagine. Before concluding, I, Damien, would like to leave you with a reflection. The impact of stories like this goes far beyond the mystery we want to unravel. It makes us question how we deal with the unknown, with doubt, and with the fact that often the truth might be right before our eyes but wrapped in layers of fear and uncertainty. Will we ever know the whole truth? Or will that fingerprint just be another piece of a puzzle that will never be completed? If you watched until here, comment, I am a mystery hunter. So I know you followed through to the end. I read every comment, and your opinions are an essential part of our work. And if you're not yet part of our community, subscribe now and help uncover the darkest secrets of the human mind. We have many more intriguing cases ahead, with mysteries that defy logic and stir our emotions. You won't want to miss what's coming next. We are always on the lookout for new mysteries to investigate, and your suggestions are crucial. If you have a dark story or mystery you'd like to see on the channel, leave it in the comments. Who knows, your suggestion might be the next case we investigate together. If you enjoyed this intriguing mystery, the next video will surprise you even more. We'll dive into a case that defies logic and stirs emotions. One of the greatest unsolved mysteries to date. Click now to discover more and satisfy your thirst for answers. Stay tuned, because evil might be closer than you think. Until the next